don't usually win the day, and yet we often acknowledge them as some of the most powerful characters in all of comics. But if they're so powerful, how can they ever lose? Why does MODOK often lose, speaking of that question? What makes him so useless? Mainly, it's all in how he's written, I would say, and honestly in his design. His design probably lends to it as well. I mean, he's just a giant head in like a floating chair, you know what I mean? It's his little limbs. MODOK though should be a terrifying and intimidating villain, and in some respects and some alternate universe stories he is, but for the most part he is made a mockery of in the comics despite the serious threat behind his name. Initially, George Charlton was a man working for AIM who was experimented on and basically altered to become the ultimate tool for analyzing the cosmic cube, which was in their possession. As a result of his enhanced intellect, his head became massive and he was given a chair to aid him as he was no longer mobile on his own. At least, that's one of his origin stories. The chair that he was given was named the Doomsday Chair, and George became MODOK, mental organism designed only for computing. MODOK. But AIM failed to predict what other side effects the added knowledge capacity and intellectual power might have on MODOK, who turned on those who had made him and ultimately became MODOK, with a K instead of a C, to be clear. Mental organism designed only for killing. Despite his kinda epic backstory and the meaning behind his name, I think MODOK is often used as a joke villain in the comics. Which villains do you think deserve more respect? How do you feel about villains being used somewhat as comedic relief? I don't know. Me personally, sometimes I like it. I really liked the MODOK series. I thought it was really funny, but also sometimes it can work against a character too, and especially like take away from their threat level. So, like MODOK, Riddler is one of the villains who often just isn't that intimidating. I gotta be real with you. I mean, I love him as a villain and I love his gimmick, but there is honestly something about Batman villains. A lot of them have to have gimmicks, it seems, and for many of them it doesn't add to their capability. In fact, it kinda limits their capability if I'm being honest. Riddler is one of those. At times he can feel unstoppable, like some mastermind who is many steps ahead of Batman. Although Batman, even if lagging initially, always seems to catch up since he is known for being, you know, the greatest detective in the world. But if you also just took Riddler and put him in a room with Batman and it came down to like a round of fisticuffs, I know where I would place my bets personally. I think you know where you'd place yours too. Being physically fit, simply put, isn't for every villain. This next one included. Mastermind is one of those villains you usually never think of when you think of someone that you just like wouldn't want to fight. You'd be like, Mastermind, I guess I'll fight him, it's not that bad. But honestly, he can be pretty dangerous. His mutant powers allow him to alter someone's mind, making them see illusions or even changing their memory in some cases. He was one of the folks responsible for helping to break Jean Grey when she was at the Hellfire Club, and his interference was part of what moved her along on her way to becoming Dark Phoenix. He's also been the person that's kind of been attached to the Void, Sentry's evil persona. That being said, at the end of the day, Mastermind's powers are purely mental, which means that he isn't the most physically intimidating of characters. Also, it was established earlier on in his canon that he actually has to remain focused on the illusion that he's conjuring at all times. Like if he breaks the concentration, then the illusion just disappears. So that's also something to consider, even from a psionic powerhouse standpoint. Oh yeah, and his illusions also, if you like try to touch them, like you can go right through them. So probably won't touch them because that's how good of illusions they are, but if you do see a wall and you decide to run through it, you'll get through it and then the illusion is broken. So you can still break them. They're breakable. Having a powerful mind is of course great, but it doesn't mean that you'll come out on top. Look, Brainiac 5 is often presented as being allergic to Earth's germs, so while he is a powerhouse when it comes to how much knowledge he has and therefore what he can get done, the fact remains that if he decides to come to Earth to face Superman, which is where admittedly Superman usually is, Brainiac can't even really leave his ship. While not all versions of the character turn him into a physical weakling, more have than haven't ultimately. For the most part, he's a villain whose power is his intellect, not his strength and prowess as a fighter. So while he's still an iconic and dangerous Superman villain, in a one-on-one fight, in most instances, Superman easily takes it. Even if a villain can see the future, it doesn't always mean they'll be the most useful in a fight either. Like this next villain. Destiny is honestly one of my favorite characters in the comics right now. Her relationship with Mystique, her dismissiveness sometimes, her sassiness, the fact that she was pretty much one of the only people standing in the way of Sinister taking over initially in Sins of Sinister, all of this and more make her an amazing character to read about. But just because I can acknowledge how great her strengths are, doesn't mean I can't acknowledge her weaknesses too. Destiny is more of a person who advises on fighting than actually does the fighting herself. She doesn't have super strength or endurance or toughness. In fact, up until recently, she was dead for a really long time in the comics, proving just how squishy she is and can be. In a fight that comes to blows, she's not exactly the one you'd want in the middle. Instead, she's often better served kind of staying off to the side, watching and looking to the future for strategies on how best to win here. Seeing the future is one thing, but how about villains who can see into and even control another's mind? Dr. Psycho gained more prominence thanks to his inclusion in the Harley Quinn animated series. Currently in the comics, he's one of Wonder Woman's main foes. That's just how powerful he is. And in the Harley Quinn animated show, he was also revealed to be pretty powerful and even faced off against Harley Quinn using a helmet to amplify his powers, kinda like how he's done before in the comics. With this helmet, he was able to control Darkseid's parademon army. However, the fact remains that while Dr. Psycho can control other physically powerful beings to make them do his bidding, he actually wouldn't be as good himself alone physically in a fight. Without his helmet, the best he can do is actually control 1 or 2 people at most, so against all of the Amazons, let's say, he would be struggling. This next villain has something in common with Dr. Psycho. He also typically gets others to do his bidding. Arcade is pretty messed up when it comes to what he's capable of doing. His main thing is being the guy to make crazy death traps for people to fall into and then later try and escape. And for the most part, he doesn't even really make those necessarily himself. He hires other people. He holds people ransom to basically get them to do his bidding for them. He is the creator of the deranged amusement park-like location known as Murder World. He's kinda like Jigsaw, but without even any moral code. However, I'd argue that both are equally deranged when it comes to their outlook on life and how they choose to treat other people. But I mean, at least John thinks he's doing something that can help people, whereas Arcade kinda just does it because he thinks it's a fun way to kill people, which is his job as an assassin for hire, I suppose. Arcade, however, as an individual, is honestly just a guy. A smart and twisted guy, but ultimately, he's just a man. I would even argue that John Kramer has more of a supernatural aura about him than Arcade does. Pretty weird considering that Arcade comes from a comic book. This next villain is super iconic, which is why I felt a bit bad about including him on my list, to be honest. I'm feeling a little guilty about it, but when you think about it, the fact remains that he's just a guy. I mean, he's a super smart, resourceful, and rich guy, I know, but still, he's just a man. In fact, while Lex boasts of being super intelligent, he's also made honestly some questionable moves in the past. Remember when he could have cured cancer and then he just didn't? The fact that Lex Luthor manages to remain as one of Superman's greatest villains is honestly baffling to me. But it's really something only made possible by the fact that Superman is super good and does not believe in killing. Because if he did, Lex wouldn't stand a chance against him. Moving on to another genius. If you know me, if you know what I like, me, Amanda, you will know that this is one of my favorite evil geniuses. Mr. Sinister was recently proven to be one of the most powerful villains around. He was so powerful, in fact, that he ended up managing to control pretty much everything and created his own version of the world in Sins of Sinister. Of course, this timeline would later be corrected and wiped out, but it's still impressive that he even managed to achieve this. But at the end of the day, Mr. Sinister is ultimately just a scientist. This means that when it comes to bronze, he tends to be kind of lacking. I know he's also usually portrayed as being a really big, kind of deezed guy in some instances, but for the most part, I would say we don't present Mr. Sinister that way, and he doesn't have super strength or anything like that. But he probably takes care of himself. He probably goes to the gym. However, case in point is his fight against his one-time nemesis Tarn the Uncaring, a mutant of Araco. Now, Tarn is an example of someone who can play with genetics and be deadly in a fight. This is because of his mutant ability to alter the genes of anyone, just like that. Tarn, along with his group known as Locus Vile, were therefore able to make fairly quick work of Sinister and his group of Hellions. Our final point is an interesting one because I feel like you could also make a case for him on a different list. A list where he would be considered the most powerful and unstoppable of villains. And of course, I'm saying that he is powerful here, just not particularly useful in a fight. Sorry, Joker. Joker is a great foil for Batman because he embodies pretty much the opposite of what Batman stands for, and yet there's also a ton of parallels between those characters. If Batman is discipline, control, respect, hard work, and justice, then Joker is disorganized chaos without regard for anyone else or other lives, more prone to throw a plan together haphazardly and messily, and of course a symbol of injustice as the crown prince of crime. It's not to say they don't have parallels, like I said, they're both also highly obsessive people. However, just because he's the opposite of Batman doesn't mean he'd manage to survive in a one-on-one fight against him. When Joker survives his encounters with Batman, it's really only because Batman allows this to be so. Let's be real. Joker might be unpredictable, which makes him a challenging foe for bats, but Batman ultimately has more skills in a single pinky than Joker has pretty much in his entire being. I would wager.
For our first pick of the day, it's actually gonna be Wonder Woman. Now, before you jump on me in the comments, you should probably know that we are talking about the OG original JSA version of Wonder Woman. Shout out to Rodney Lindsay in the comments of part 1 of this list for the suggestion. But let's just get it out of the way right now. Wonder Woman is probably the first person that I would choose to fight for me if I had to pick. She is a warrior bound, probably the most useful combatant the Justice League has. But when Wonder Woman was part of the Justice Society back in the 40s, she was arguably the most powerful hero on the team, and yet the JSA put her in the position of secretary. When the JSA introduced Wonder Woman as their first female member in All-Star Comics number 8 from 1941, Diana was originally an honorary member and was made secretary of the team. Future issues of All-Star Comics would even start with a roll call that emphasized the fact that Wonder Woman was just the secretary to the Justice Society of America. She was forced to be held back on multiple missions and wasn't given a serious role on the team for years. Meanwhile, she could probably completely wreck every single member of the team in a one-on-one fight. I think we are all glad that she finally got the respect she deserved eventually. Now, some superheroes aren't strictly superheroes. Some are a little more ambiguous with the morality, and one of those characters would have to be the Asgardian god of mischief, Loki. While Loki is more than capable in many different ways, being an amazingly capable magician and tactician who is known to be more than proficient with a blade from time to time, problem is, more than half the time, they aren't really doing any fighting at all. Loki is more prone to finding any way possible to sidestep actually fighting someone, and then when they do fight someone, they almost never play fair, and more often than not, it will not be some kind of hand-to-hand shot-for-shot fight. Loki plays to their strengths, and those strengths are deception, trickery, and staying out of the line of fire and letting other people take the hits, assuming that they don't just betray you completely. And yet, Loki, especially recently, is someone who is so powerful that they can change literal events in time. But moving on from Loki, Mr. Immortal is the leader and founder of the Great Lakes Avengers, and he is one of the only members of a superior form of human evolution known as Homo Supreme. As a more evolved form of humans than even the mutants, you'd expect Craig Hollis to have an amazing power, and he does. Craig here literally cannot bite the dust no matter what happens. Craig just gets better and walks it off. Mr. Immortal has been stated to be destined to be the last living being in the universe, merging with the sentience of the cosmos, surviving beyond the end of time, and moving on into the next iteration of everything. That's awesome. Unfortunately, it means diddly squat when he gets into a fight. Craig's only real strength when it comes to fighting is being used as a human shield. And the worst part is that when he eventually revives and comes back to the world of the living, he almost always just has a big old temper tantrum that only particular characters can calm down. Being an immortal character, he has experience and obviously some leadership ability, but when it comes to a fight, do not count on him for anything but taking one for the team. Now moving on, the character of Jin Genie, who appeared as a member of the Ecstatics team, was a mutant, and usually that's already a few points in the power department, which is especially true here as Becca Parker had the power to generate seismic vibrations, which is an awesomely powerful ability, until you learn that the level of her power is directly proportionate to how much liquid courage she has consumed. As you can imagine, being intoxicated in order to use your superpowers can be rather interesting. It seems like one of the things that you should add to the list of things you shouldn't do while under the influence. Don't drive, don't operate heavy machinery, don't use your superpowers to cause earthquakes, that normal kind of thing. Unfortunately, we do not get to see her use her powers much, or get an explanation for why her power is the way it is, because Jin Genie is stricken with unliving in the same comic book that she's introduced, X-Force number 116 in July of 2001. But while some people can create earthquakes while under the influence, other people are just really good at making loud noises. And for ham radio operator Jerry Carstairs, it's the latter. Frustrated by the apparent inaction of America against crime, Jerry here developed a costume with a built-in speaker system loud enough to shock and deafen anyone crossing his path, and he stepped into the superhero world as the Thunderer. The problem here is that while his power system was strong enough to actually crumble buildings, he didn't really have the kind of control that one might need to actually keep innocent people out of harm's way. So sure, his power did actually defeat villains like a deformed dwarf who had a vendetta against good-looking people and used Morse code through the radio to end people's lives. I don't even understand that, but wait! no, Jerry's powers were actually used to end the dwarves' operations. Instead, it was actually an accidental house fire that defeated the bad guy in that story. Jerry would go on to rebrand as the Black Avenger, and he fought against the Axis powers until Red Skull wiped him out alongside a number of heroes using the Cosmic Cube. But switching over to DC for this next point, when an alien race has all their food infected by microbes, instead of going extinct as you might expect, they actually evolved to be able to eat unlimited amounts of any form of matter to survive instead. Yes, welcome to Planet Bismol, home to Legion of Superheroes member Tenzil Kem, better known as Matter Eater Lad. In addition to being able to eat unlimited amounts of pretty much anything, Matter Eater Lad can also analyze matter's contents, determine if it contains poisons, metabolize his food quickly in order to obtain super speed, and use his special Bismolian digestive enzyme in order to make tough materials like steel easier to consume. Now, look, I'm not casting any doubt on how useful that power can and has been. Matter Eater Lad has used his powers to break his team out of prison cells and eat entire asteroids that were set to destroy civilizations. But Bismolians are barred from eating other people, or they get their teeth removed. So any fighting ability this guy has is not on par with his eating ability, and it's not on par with other members of the Legion of Superheroes, even a tiny little bit. But going back to Marvel, some members of Marvel's mutant population are pretty unique, and Maggot is definitely among them. Instead of having a digestive system, the mutant known as Maggot's body is essentially the home of two pretty big blue maggot-like creatures who are able to leave his body, eat anything they want, then crawl back into his guts, nourishing him and helping him grow in size, stamina, and speed. First of all, that's absolutely disgusting. But secondly, this presents a pretty big problem. That being that unless he has pre-gamed his fight, Maggot will need to hang back and find something for his maggots to consume to give him enough power to actually enter the fight. And then on top of everything, the slugs need to enter through his stomach in a very meticulous, precise manner to even be properly effective. And if they are separated from Maggot long enough, he literally will perish. His powers are very, very dependent on who is writing him and who he is fighting, as a smart enough villain will be able to take advantage of his massive weakness with a quickness. I guess on the plus side though, Maggot does have another power, being able to see things from the recent past or the immediate future, but there are plenty of other characters that can do the same thing and do it even better. Coming into our third from last spot today, listen. For a guy named Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards is pretty damn useless when it comes to a fight. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Reed here is on a team with a guy who can burn as hot as the sun, a rock monster who can trade punches with the Incredible Hulk, and a woman who can turn invisible and control invisible, near impenetrable force fields, which he has used to not only defend her and others, but even destroy people's brains. What Reed lacks in fighting ability is made up for by his teammates, leaving him to use his absolutely fantastic mind to lead his team and save the day by tackling the side of the conflict that has the least amount of physical conflict as possible. He can use his powers offensively, obviously, and has on multiple occasions, but we all know it's not where his true strength lies. And I think the alternate reality version of this character, known as the Maker, is a perfect example of this, as even as a villain, the Maker uses deception, trickery, carefully thought out plans, and much more capable villains to get his work done. And second from last today, when Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, was originally part of the Avengers, he did not enjoy fighting at all. Hank, a genius scientist, was surrounded by physically powerful, confident, and self-assured men and women who were much more capable and impressive than he was. And he wanted to impress his girlfriend, Janet Van Dyne, who arguably also became much more powerful than him. So, Hank used his knowledge over Pym particles to grant himself the ability to shrink, grow, and control insects with his powers. While those abilities are all incredibly useful, it doesn't mean he's actually good at fighting. When you are small enough that your opponent can't see you, or big enough that your opponent just can't realistically face you, it doesn't make you a good fighter, it just gives you an extreme advantage. And it's been proven time and time again that even when he's big or small, Hank Pym can still be brought back to reality by a capable enough villain or even a fellow hero. And he's also not really that great of a guy to begin with. His biggest claims to fame are how smart he is, but not really, because he created Ultron, and being horrible to his wife. But finally, coming in at our top spot today is a Green Lantern. But while the Green Lanterns as a whole are incredibly powerful characters, with their rings being one of the most powerful devices in the universe, the Green Lantern known as Gnort, or Nort if you want to call him that, is just not up to snuff. Gnort got his ring as a fluke and eventually came to Earth to join up with the Justice League International, and he basically became their pet and the butt of like 90% of their jokes. But unlike actual superhero pets, Gnort was not an animal. He is an alien. He's also not cute at all, and he was probably the most annoying of anyone on that team. Kind of like a chihuahua. What is even the point of those dogs? I don't get it. Gnort was literally so disliked that Maxwell Lord created a whole new team, Justice League Antarctica, and Gnort was the only member completely unaware that it was all just a ruse to get him to go away. You know how bad you have to be as a Green Lantern that people will come up with ridiculous ways to get rid of you? Even Guy Gardner was more effective, and everyone hates him. I kind of almost feel bad for Nort.
And now for something quite different. We head over to DC, specifically Watchmen. Rorschach is definitely a useful character in general. He happens to gather enough intel to take down one of the smartest men around who the world thought was actually a hero, Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, by exposing him as the villain that he actually is. Or is he? Well, I mean, I guess that depends really on your opinion. In Watchmen, I'd say no one is truly like a stereotypical superhero, at least, you know, not by our atypical standards. When we think of like superheroes like Superman or Wonder Woman, these are supremely flawed characters instead, which is kind of the whole point, I think, of Watchmen, as Watchmen is more of a commentary on like the superhero genre, rather than something that was ever really truly intended to like belong to that genre. But I digress. Regardless of how you feel about Rorschach's actions in terms of them being right or wrong, or Adrian's actions in terms of them being right or wrong, Rorschach does manage to defeat Veidt eventually by exposing his actions. But at the same time, he doesn't have superpowers himself. He's just kind of an obsessive and likely crazy man. Although he would eventually accomplish his task, he doesn't live to see it carried out, as he is easily killed by Dr. Manhattan when he threatens to confess the truth of Veidt's involvement in the attack on New York through the world. And even then, it does end up coming to light, but it also takes a while before that revelation happens. If we're talking a pure fist fight, Professor X should probably not be your go-to, unless you happen to be on the astral plane, or he happens to be in a body or form where he actually has use of his legs and can, you know, fight a little bit better. For most of his appearances though in the comics, he's usually without the ability to like stand up and fight. He's usually confined to his chair, unless of course he is armed with a Shi'ar exosuit. But even then, for some reason, I've always imagined the Shi'ar exosuit to move extremely slowly, because it just looks so bulky in the comics. It was like that's what I imagine in my mind. I don't know if that's how it moves. It's a comic, so it's hard for me to see it moving, but yeah. Professor X, while not known for being a skilled physical combatant, actually has the training to be. So, fun fact, Professor X is actually really good at fighting, but he's just not usually as capable when it comes to his fighting prowess, which is also why he's actually pretty good at fighting on the astral plane. But then again, this is also a character whose Ultimate Universe version was defeated by stairs, and that's not me trying to be rude, that's literally the comic. That's what it says. That being said, Charles doesn't really need to be good in a fight, because he could always just like stop you from fighting him altogether by wiping your memory, changing your memory, or just making you go brain dead. But that also hasn't always worked out in his favor as a tactic, to be honest. Onslaught, I'm looking at you. This next one is going to be controversial. I know some people are going to be mad with me for this one, so before you, well actually me, my fellow nerds, let me acknowledge the first part of the title of this list: powerful superheroes. What I'm really saying here is that John Constantine, or Constantine if you prefer, is one of the most powerful superheroes we have. He is one of the most resourceful characters I know of in comics. He has insane magical understanding and power. He's evaded death countless times and saved the world definitely more than once. He's tricked even the trickiest of demons, but also, yes, sometimes he's kind of useless in a fight. Now, granted, Constantine is capable, but that's not the issue here. It's more the fact that Constantine is a bit more scrappy and improvisational when it comes to how he approaches a fight. He also is a magic user, so he's honestly a bit squishy all around. And even if he happens to have everything together when he approaches combat, he's like super organized, super prepared, he has a tendency to betray his allies and his friends, often going rogue and kind of doing his own thing for his own reasons. So yeah, sometimes this makes him kind kinda useless, or at least not a great person to fight alongside, especially if we're asking those that he has fought alongside in the past. Most people don't trust him, even those that are closest to him, and honestly, kind of for a good reason. Coming up, someone you might not expect to make our cut, it is Wonder Man. Okay, so Wonder Man is actually really powerful, and honestly, we don't talk about him enough on the channel, which is why I'm both excited to include him here and also a little disappointed in myself for doing so. And that is because I am about to call him useless, so sorry, Wonder Man. However, this is simply restricted to a certain time in his career where Wonder Man actually preferred to be a pacifist. So while powerful at that point in his superhero career, because he's always really powerful, be pretty useless in a fight because he just didn't want to fight, so haha. While some have disagreed with me on Constantine, I think this one is a pretty universal pick from DC Comics. Detective Chimp is actually a pretty impressive hero, to be real with you. He is considered to be one of the world's greatest detectives, with his skills even rivaling that of Batman. He is supremely intelligent, but Bobo also isn't especially skilled in combat, and he often tends to be inebriated, which makes him not particularly well suited to a fight when he does end up in one. He's incredibly smart, but also often kind of a mess, which is why he makes my cut. Continuing on with another hero who I often feel gets overlooked, despite how powerful he truly is, we have Cypher. Look, I love Cypher, but at the end of the day, he's just not the best fighter. Even though I think people forgot that he was at one point the best fighter, because he used to be able to understand fighting as though it were a language, because that's his mutant power, and of course, using that logic, he should actually be an incredible dancer as well. Is Doug an incredible dancer? Has this ever been confirmed in canon? If you're a mega New Mutants fan or a mega just Doug Ramsey fan and you know, let me know, because I need to know about this. And if this isn't a thing yet in canon, I am asking Marvel to make it so. Let it be known. Someone at Marvel on this, please make this happen. If you're watching this, Marvel, anyone from Marvel, please help a Doug fan out. I know some of you watch. I know some of you do. So yes, in theory, he actually should be a good fighter, but during the Otherworld tournament in Ten of Swords, it seems like this aspect of his powers was dropped, changed, or just straight up forgotten. Doug was back to pretty much square one fighting when training with magic. Really though, I don't hate that change because Cypher is already powerful enough without being a master of physical combat. I don't think he needs it. He can communicate with technology, understand any language, and it's this power set that made him an essential part of Krakoa. Seriously, without him, Krakoa would have actually never been able to happen for the mutants. He was the only one who could communicate with the sentient mutant island. Why he's gone now, probably. As with Wonder Man, having power doesn't necessarily mean you always want to use it, or even in some cases, best know how to utilize it, perhaps. This is something our next hero encapsulates, whose interests usually lie elsewhere when it comes to just how he approaches and deals with conflict. Despite being a new god, which you'd think would make him OP, and in fact, honestly it should, Mr. Miracle isn't often known for his fighting prowess. New gods are extremely powerful, godlike aliens. Darkseid is one of them, and Mr. Miracle is one too. But often, Scott-Free just prefers to escape than take someone on in a fight. It's more this preference that makes him not particularly great at fighting. He could stand and fight if he had to, but he'd usually just rather escape because it's kind of his whole thing. It makes sense when you consider his wife also being Big Barda is usually with him, and she's the one who's more skilled in combat, having once belonged to Darkseid's elite guard team of female Furies. So she's just trained in combat, she's super buff, and when you observe that Mr. Miracle also grew up hoping and planning his potential escape from the planet Apocalypse for most of his life, I mean, it kind of makes sense. This is how and why he became a master escape artist, basically, which is usually what he's more known for and what he does, despite his super strength, his durability, and sheer immortality that he gets from being a new god. I don't think I have to say too much about this next one. Destiny is a powerful precog. She can see into the future, and often her visions are quite accurate. The more likely something is to happen, the more clear it will become to her. However, she doesn't have super strength. She doesn't have combat experience or training, per se, and she is legally blind, so she probably isn't the best person to pick when it comes to, like, just a straight up fist fight. That being said, she's still an insanely powerful character, regardless of whether or not she'd win a round of fisticuffs. Like Professor X, you know what I mean? These people don't even need that. Also, she has her wife Mystique to aid her in that kind of battle. So really, Destiny is super OP, but just maybe not like punching stuff. And finally, the one I don't think anyone guessed would be on here, just because I don't think a lot of people think about this character, it's King of Cities. King of Cities is Jack Hawksmoor. When inside a massive city, he is supremely powerful. While in a city, he can communicate with that city, get it to do his bidding, and the city also bolsters his powers. He can see anything a window has seen, gazing into the past literally through it. He telepathically communicates with buildings. His senses are enhanced, he doesn't need to, and he has amazing survival instincts while in a city. He's just built to survive in cities. However, if he finds himself outside of a city, he becomes extremely weak, and in some cases can even even die. So fight him in a city, he's seemingly unstoppable. Fight him outside of a city, and a mild breeze would probably just be enough to defeat him. You just stand there and he just fall over.